Today I'm going to talk about, I have a regular here and I see a lot of faces also who I see quite regularly. So let's see how this presentation turns out. So how many of you consider yourself to be very good programmers? Raise your right hand. Right hand, right hand. Come on. So few people think that it doesn't matter what your boss thinks. I am not asking you what your boss thinks. You still consider yourself to be a good programmer. Okay? Okay. How many of you consider yourself to be very good software designer? Raise both hands if you consider both these statements true. Okay. Some people, yeah. Okay, and I see that some people are shy. They don't want to say, yeah, I'm a good programmer. Don't be shy. Okay? So there will be a lot of questions and interactions in the session, and the session won't be fun without that. So the question is, can somebody be a very good programmer but a lousy software designer? How many of you believe that is possible? That somebody can be a great programmer but lousy at design? Raise your hand if you believe that is possible. Yeah, some hands are going up. I have seen people who are extraordinary programmers. Programmers, so let's be clear, I'm using some terms, so you may be thinking of something else. So what do I mean by a programmer? You tell him, if this is the input, this is the output I want. Bang, you'll have it ready for you, okay? But then, if you have to maintain the code, if you have to make changes, anything that is happening, then it's, oh my god, how do we make that change? Then you tell him, I want this small change. Then they'll say, yeah, doing it first time took 2 days, but already fine, right? So, extraordinary programmer, but lousy designer. And the thought for this discussion came up of because of something that my daughter talked to me about. My daughter studied architecture. Okay? So we were discussing something. She's more interested in science and maths, but she's also interested in craft and art and all that. So she decided, let me go for software architecture. Architecture, not software architecture, real architecture architecture. So she said it's a mix of these two things. And she says, you know, the class, and architecture is one of the things where you do a lot of scientific things like structural analysis, basics of structural analysis and all that. And you also do creative things where you have to design something. And she's saying, the technical classes were well connected, it was easy to understand, I could do well. I struggled because the design classes were very hard. The teachers, the professors would teach very well. I found it difficult to learn design. And I thought back of my experience, and I manage a lot of teams, and I see this a lot. That there are people who are very good at programming, but when it comes to design, they seem to be struggling. And one of the problems I feel is, how do you learn design? So, have any of you formally studied software design? Yeah, you may have done a computer science course. How many of you studied software design? And how do you make, if you want to become good at software design, there must be some place where you can learn software design. Can anybody tell me? And I'm serious, I'm not asking you. See, most of my speeches are basically things I am thinking and struggling with personally, so please, I may be completely wrong when I make this statement. Any statement I make may be completely wrong, because it's only I have looked out so much. So if you have an answer to this question, I would be very happy to hear it. So it's a serious question. If somebody is in your team, you you see somebody joins your team, is working for 3 years. He's a very good software programmer. You want him to become a good designer. What would you tell him? Go, do this to become a good designer. Yeah. Okay. Good answer. Design pattern, clean code, design patterns, solid principles from clean code, all those things. Yeah, something else.
So the course material we yourself design it, and the course material moves then step by step to this direction.
Okay, so you have an internally created sort of course which takes a lot, but there's nothing available. And isn't that kind of? I mean, I find it so difficult. There are hundreds and thousands of people who want to move from programmers to designers, but if there's nobody. Yeah.
Yeah, when you read design patterns, you start from the last chapter, not
Right.
the first chapter.
Right.
Most of the developers read till the last previous chapters they call the design pattern. The last chapter actually teaches you what is it.
We'll come to that. I'm going a little detail into that. Yeah.
Design is the one aspect.
Right.
It doesn't happen too frequently.
Yeah.
Examine the other architectures or the projects that are going on around which you are seeing what you are working on and then understanding how it is being done differently and what are the requirements to it. It has to happen with the help of the senior people in the organization.
Right.
But normally what happens, it's not a concept but no time.
Yeah, who has the time to mentor somebody to become a software designer? It's a real problem, the way I see it. So, I'm just putting down the thoughts and, please share your feeling. Yeah.
I would just like to add, in the discussion ongoing, it's an interesting discussion. So I would like to point out that there is off-shelf learning and there is experience-based learning.
Right.
So things, the technologies that we are talking about today, they are off-shelf learning. You want to learn Python, get a book, you know how to write, and you are done.
Yeah.
You want to do something else, I mean, technologies are very straightforward. If you follow the rules, you are done.
Right.
Software design and software architecture are not the same, you can't fit the same things in that. There are methods, there are tools, there are techniques, there are concepts, but when to apply what is.
Yeah. That is the whole theme of my talk actually. He summarized my talk already. Okay. So I'm one of those very rare people. I went from technology to HR, okay, which, HR and technology guys are deadly enemies, right? So I went over to the enemy's camp. So something which I learned there, which, I found very interesting, saying that the suitability of a person for a particular role, there are 3 things. One is knowledge, second is skill, and third is attitude. That sounds simple. But who can define for me the difference between skill and knowledge?
Skill is a hands-on, knowledge is more theory. Skill is something hands-on, you know what works, what doesn't work, that is skill.
Okay.
Knowledge is just you know this concept, you can answer, you can do a presentation, you can do an answer, you can show yourself well in an interview. But skill is something you did it and you burned yourself.
Yeah.
Why you got, why you not got.
Right. So that is right in one sense. By the way, I am supposed to hand out, and since you summarized my talk, I must give you a gift. So, yeah.
One more point to add to that. Knowledge is something which is already known. Right? So you can answer something which is known, but with skill you can solve something. You can solve something which is unknown. Like you can look at a new situation and.
Okay. So in HR, they discuss this a lot. So you're a technology guy, so let me tell you what your enemies are telling you for talking about. So knowledge is binary. Either do you know how to time or reef knot? Either the answer is yes or it's no. Okay? Whereas a skill is something which lies across a spectrum. Okay? Can you ride a bicycle? Yes, you can say yes, but there's a spectrum there, right? Either you tire if not, you can tire if not, or not tire if not. Whereas you can be a world-class cyclist, or you're a cyclist who's just able to balance, right? So skill is a spectrum, and knowledge is kind of binary in our terminology. The attitude is attitude. So small, simple quizzes. There's a patch of lily pad on a lake. Every day the patch doubles in size. It takes 48 days for the patch to cover. How long will it take for the patch to cover half the lake? And how many of you think the answer is 24? Nobody. 31? Nobody. 42? Nobody. 42? 47? Okay, perfect. So that's the right answer. Fantastic. Next question. Which is the drawing of a bird? How many of you think the top left is a drawing of a bird? Yeah. How many of you think top right is a drawing of a bird? Yes. Bottom left, bottom right. So, all the answers are right. Right? The thing to understand drawing is, and I keep using drawing as an analogy towards design because both are skills. Okay, design is a skill, so is drawing. So to think about drawing helps us to understand about design. So one thing when you think about this is, it is very contextual. Supposing I'm illustrating a book, okay, and what I'm supposed to draw is what a child drew when you ask the child to draw a bird. The first answer is right for that. It's the most appropriate answer, right? Second one, if you're creating icons, that's an appropriate answer. If you're doing cartoon, third is an appropriate answer. If you're illustrating a book for bird watchers, the fourth one is an appropriate answer. So all these answers are appropriate in their context. So that's, I think, a key aspect that we have here. So choose the right answer. It's Python, and I'll not put the line folding, just what will be printed, Dict India, etc., etc. Just read it. If I say print Dict India, how many think tiger will be the right answer? How many think lotus will be the right answer? How many think peacock will be the right answer? How many think none of these will be the right answer? Alright, so good. He was the fastest to raise his hand. There's a spelling mistake. It's none of these. It will say key not found. Right? So none of these is the right answer. Which is the best design? So I have three designs here. One says print boolware, then if boolware is print widget boom set to format, yes. Or emoticon display from an emoticon factory and emoticon display show window. Which is the right design? And there is no right answer. All three answers are right. If the context, I am putting in this for debugging onto my console, right? Simply saying print boolware is sufficient, right? If I am writing a console app and I will show some information to the user, or I want to log some status to a log file, second is probably right. If I'm doing a GUI kind of app, then probably the third design is right. So there's no question of actually the word right when it comes to design is something which I think is a problem. We need to keep saying what is appropriate for the context. And so I was thinking, why is it that there are some people who are great programmers and some people who are great designers, and sometimes they're both. So there are two types of thinking. Well, there are many types of thinking. One is analytical thinking. The second is critical thinking. Right? So everybody has a slightly different definition for what this is, but for practical purposes, when you're looking for the one right answer, when everything else is wrong, right? You're using analytical thinking. Oops. Then, how do you use analytical thinking? You learn a lot of rules, right? Then you learn how to apply the rules, and it just becomes analytical thinking. What is the right rule? What's the right rule for me to use it? And apply the rule, and you get the right answer. So this is what you want when you're programming, right? Okay, this is what I want to do. What's the rule I should use? Then choose the right rule and apply it. So, how do you become better and better? How do you become a better and better programmer? You gather more and more knowledge. You learn more and more rules. You learn more and more rules. The more rules you learn, and the better you are at selecting the right rule for this thing, you become a better programmer, right? So, I started programming very, very long back. There was no internet. There were no networks. Most people used to have standalone desktops. Okay? So, you would have a group. Why was he a group? Because he had knowledge. Okay? So, hey boss, I need to do this. I don't know how to do it. He'll say, go call this function with these parameters. After that, return this value, pass it to this H wing to this, and do this, and it will have, oh, thank you, okay? Because knowledge was very hard those days, because you have to actually sit down and read books and remember in your memory what those books said. Today's Stack Overflow, here it is, right? So basically, there is no such thing as a guru, because Stack Overflow is your guru nowadays. And that's all it is. So, critical thinking is slightly different. Critical thinking is, all the answers are right, but which is the most appropriate? Some are more appropriate than others based on the context, right? So, the first thing you have to do in these situations is, understand the context. Then decide an approach. Okay, if this is the context, I think this is the right way to do it, and you execute that approach. It's a very different type of thinking. You have people look into this a little more depth as you go through the presentation. But the key is, it's about decisions. It is not about applying, choosing a rule. You have to take decisions. You have to consider many things, and the answer has to be in the context of what you're trying to do. So, design, you have to develop a skill. So, this focuses on how, and this focuses on why. The question that a programmer answers is, if this is the input and I want this output, how can I create that output? I write the code which creates that output. For a designer, the question is very different. What is the most appropriate way to structure my code if this is my context. And these are two different ways of thinking, right? Our traditional science, when you are a student, it is more focused on analytical thinking, gathering knowledge, understanding the rules, choosing the rules, and applying the rules. That is the main focus of what people learn in school. And so people become programmers and then they struggle to become designers because they have never learned how to do critical thinking. This is something which I've seen a lot. So let's understand this. Okay, so here's the question. I'm going to show you some quotations from the book.
Just a question here.
Yeah.
Today, the cloud era, where we are moving cloud native, we are moving cloud, where we are using the tools.
Right.
Are we pushing analytical thinking more? That's a question.
Right.
The second thing is, you talk about critical thinking.
Right.
There's something called design thinking which is also coming today. Right?
Yes.
You possibly have to distinguish yourself from there.
Right.
Just to put it, the first one is the question, right?
Right.
You talk about Kubernetes, OpenFaaS, AWS, everything. These are all tools.
Right.
And are we driving our analytical thinking only? That's the question I want to know.
Yeah, it is true because now it is more about frameworks. Now the question was, are we moving more and more towards creating tools which can be just used with analytical thinking and there is no critical part, right?
Understand rules, choose rules, apply rules.
Correct. If you saw the previous one, I was just thinking, I was actually thinking of it as a local form, fast thing, right? Because you don't need to do anything, you just need to write this function, then you write a YAML, then you call something. You don't understand why that is happening, whether what that guy is doing is the right thing or the wrong thing, you don't know. It's a black box to you, right? It's a black box to you. You don't know, you are just using it, and if something goes wrong, you're helpless. Right?
And even the right function that way, you don't know whether it's the right design.
Right.
The only thing is it will reduce the cost.
Right. Yeah, and it is true. See, in some sense, coding is, people are trying to commoditize coding, right? So, I just need to get things done quickly. So they are trying to convert the number of people who need to be able to do critical thinking. They want to reduce that, and they want, because analytical thinking is something, if you've got somebody who's got good grades in school, you can be sure he's learned analytical thinking. Has he learned critical thinking? No clue. Right? If I can create systems which allow analytical thinkers to deliver, then I've solved part of my problem. As far as the organization is concerned, but innovation, all those things get killed. It just boils down to delivery, right? The only innovation is in the business side. There's no innovation on the technology side possible, right? The people who are to innovate on the technology side need to start using critical thinking. It's not something that you are taught, it's not something which is easy. So I'm going to show you some quotes from the book. If you know what that book is, don't say what that book is, just raise your hand, okay? I want to see how many people have read the book. So, program to an interface, not an implementation. Favor object composition of a class inheritance. Okay, 2 people have raised their right hand, 3 people have raised their right hand. Oh, look, good. Common causes of redesign. Creating objects by specifying class, dependent on specific operations, algorithmic tight coupling, right? So, some people have raised their right hands. Now, I'll ask a different question. Which book is this? Creational, abstract, factory, builder, factory method, prototype, singleton, structural, adapter, bridge. Do you know the answer to this? What is this book? Gang of Full book. Everybody knows this. This is also from the gang of photo. This is also from the gang of four folks, right? But this is in the introduction, as he was discussing, this was in the introduction and in the everything. He's saying, how do you do this? I mean, it's not enough to know the design patterns, you need to know when to apply what design pattern, right? So he's trying to teach you the critical thinking aspects of these things, right? But as usual, this everybody's got it. I mean, if I ask, if I go to in an interview, I ask, okay, tell me what the builder method does or what the factory method does. I know this is what it does. Why would you ever use it and why would you not use it? I don't know. Right? So, that's the real problem. So, to help us think about this, as I said, I think there's a lot of linkage between art and software design. Okay, so let me.
And I'm pretty happy with that, ladies and gentlemen. So if I zoom out, that there is Jackson Space Punk. So I hope you understand the process that I've kind of gone through to get to this final result that I'm happy with. I start off here with all these just random ideas and we just see what works. And then in the next phase...
Okay, so this is an artist, right? So it's a 30-minute video. I'm just showing you a very small snippet. But what's interesting is, okay, there's no this thing. He's first put down the context. He's first put down the context. He's saying, this is preliminary character design for Jackson, who is a space punk. Okay? Then he brings the concept a little tighter. He says, okay, he is a rebel with an attitude, he's a young adult, maybe 20 to 25. He has crazy hair and he has an eye different. Okay? So first he starts with the concept. He just first starts with the context. This is the context I'm in. In this context, what would be right?
And I'm pretty happy with that, ladies and gentlemen. So if I zoom out, that there is Jackson Space Punk. So I hope you understand the process that I've kind of gone through to get to this final result that I'm happy with. I start off here with all these just random ideas and we just see what works. And then in the next phase, in the second phase, we see if they work together. So we're just kind of starting off with a lot, bringing it down to a few, and then finish off with one, which is our final design, Jackson the Space Punk. Happy with the result. I hope you enjoyed this video tutorial, ladies and gentlemen. If you have any comments, make sure to leave them in the comment section below and to like and subscribe. And all.
If you want to learn software design, there's a lot you can learn from that 10-second clip, really. Right? First, write down the concept. Then, once you have a context, so let's talk about skill. How you become better at a skill in general, right? So first, context. All skill is about understanding the context, spending time thinking of the context, and seeing how you can create appropriate solutions for that context, right? So first is that. The second thing which it does, which I think is critical, which this is the critical step where everybody fails, right? He does not try to come to one answer. Okay, I'll just take you back to that video because I think that video is very interesting for many reasons.
And I'm pretty happy with that.
This doesn't show me a.
That there is Jackson the Space Punk. So I hope you understand the process that I've kind of gone through to get to this final result that I'm happy with. I start off here.
Okay, so in the video, man, what he does is he just draws these 5 things. Then he looks at it and he says, I like this hair, so he colors it. I like this eye, or I color it. I like this. I like this hair. I like this, right? Oh, I like this. I like this. So he has diverged. What are the various various things I can do to create this, right? Then he looks at, oh, this is good. This is nice. This is nice, right? So this looks to be the right answer. And because of our orientation towards analytical thinking, we try to see, can I draw the right figure immediately first time, right? But the art is one of those places which is very, very skill dependent. And you will see this, that artists experiment, right? They don't, I mean, if you see the interview with Beatles, I don't remember which one of them, one of the Beatles, about one song. It took them 3 months to get the tune right, to get the words right. They tried playing around with it, and this and that. You only hear the final song, right? But people who are in a skill kind of work, right, as opposed to knowledge kind of work, they understand that if it's a skill, the thing that you have to practice is first diverging and then converging. Right? So he does this, and he says, okay, but diverging and converging, this is, I think, what we struggle with, really, as analytical thinkers. Come up with 3 ideas. Come up with 5 ideas. Think. Take decisions after looking at 5 ideas. Don't try to come up with the right answer immediately. That is the biggest problem why programmers struggle to become designers. Because their orientation is I should come up to the first right answer the first time. That's what makes me a good programmer. Then you have to make a decision. So you have to think about why this approach, why not this approach. So you can't start saying you had an idea. I think this is a good design for this. Immediately you will start putting down 3 reasons why this is the right idea. You have to put down why not. Before taking first diverse, look at all the options, see the pros and cons of each option. Why this? Why not this? Why this? Why not this? That's the next critical step in design. How? Forget it. How is not the problem you're trying to solve at all. And again, something which comes from art is, for them, history is very important. If you see somebody who is learning art seriously, they will know how art evolved, what Rembrandt did, what Mona Lisa was drawn, who did Leonardo da Vinci, all Van Gogh, what he did, what was his style, why was it appreciated, what was new about him. There is nobody who is an artist who does not know something of the history of art. Right? And their own, if you take Picasso, he has 10 periods. They understand that the artist also evolves. It's not just that art evolves over time, an artist evolves over time. When I first do my initial designs, it may be lousy. I'm pretty sure when Picasso started painting his first 2 paintings were lousy, right? But I have to constantly try and become better and better. We'll discuss further, but history is important, and I think because we're so focused on knowledge, right? We don't see how software has evolved over time, how computers have evolved over time, how design approaches have evolved over time. That's something we don't know. So we don't understand why one approach is good and why one approach is bad. We don't know because we don't know the history. So I have a friend called Charles. We have arguments forever. Okay? About design, about language. So, as I said, why not this approach? So you also have to see the negative. So if you just Google why is object-oriented programming bad, you'll find hundreds of articles, right? So Charles, he's a functional programmer. He likes Lisp. He knows Lisp is not practical, but he'll try to use Haskell. So he's a functional procedural kind of guy. He says he is totally and the reason why he went there is he was working in an organization which was using a huge set of objects, and it was a nightmare to maintain, right? So he was totally turned off by object-oriented programming, and he used to tell me, oh, this object-oriented programming is nonsense. And he would share articles with me, my object-oriented programming is bad. And I kind of scratched my head and say, but you know, I've been programming for a while, so I remember when object-oriented programming was the hot new thing. I'm sorry, I'm old. Okay? So previously we used to have procedure. You could just write functions and proceed. So, but I said, when object-oriented programming, I loved it. So we sat down and for 2 years, suddenly some new article will come, we'll discuss that. And suddenly something struck me that, today almost all languages support the concept of structure and treating functions as first class functions. You can pass around functions. In the olden days, in the old languages, you couldn't have structures. You couldn't have functions were not first class. You couldn't pass a function as a parameter. And I said, these are two critical things for good software design. And what object-oriented programming allowed you to do was to use an object as a structure and pass around objects, and the methods would be functions which you could pass around. And I never did Gang of Four style programming. There is another author called Wurzbach, and she's written a brilliant book called Responsibility-Centric Design. I'm a big fan of that book. And I think I never used objects as objects. I was using them as structures and first-class functions which I could pass around. And so finally he agreed, yes, if you're in a language where you don't have structures and you don't have first-class functions, objects are good. So finally the argument was settled. So, but that's history, we talk about this, we need to find somebody to discuss this with you. I know it's hard, but you have to find somebody and you have to read about the history of how why did object-oriented programming evolve, things like that. I think that's part of what it takes to become a great designer. So, rather than talking theory only, let's look. Okay. So whatever framework, tool, whatever you're using, please Google for negative articles. If you are using MongoDB, look for why is MongoDB bad. If you are using OpenFaaS, look for why is OpenFaaS bad. Okay? So, because if you don't understand the negative aspects, then you will not realize, hey, in this context, because of these negative aspects, this is not the right answer. Right? If why is React.js bad? Why is Vue.js bad? Why should you not use this? Why is Redux so horrible? Right? There are articles about it. You have to read it. And they are written by people who face the problems in their context and they're sharing that information. And that is critical information if you use critical thinking and take decisions. Study history of your technology, your language, your infrastructure. When did it develop? Who developed it? Why did he decide to develop it? What are the problems that they were trying to address? Why did it become popular? Don't ignore history. I mean, if you could learn the history of the entire computing history is good, but at least of the technology that you're using, you should understand the history. But boss, I need to write a website, what should I use? Suppose you use React, not the React. It's done, right? You're never going to be able to design if you do that. So, there are a lot of people, if you just search for white papers that every programmer should read, articles which every React programmer should read, articles which every Angular programmer should read, you will find. And usually, those are critical things. Don't just go to Stack Overflow and say, how do I do this now? This is how I do it, test the code now, right? Spend some time, and many times, if the person who is written the React platform will have written articles, right? And some people who are part of that will have written articles, read those articles. So these are first things to do. But we have the next step. Another thing which is very critical for skill development is the concept of deliberate practice. So, if you search for exercises to do to become better at drawing and things like that, this is an exercise. He says, just take a piece of paper, keep drawing circles and filling up the whole page. Make it smaller, smaller, smaller. Don't intersect the circles as far as possible, right? Don't overlap circles. Learn to fill up this with circles. There are hundreds of draw parallel lines, draw straight lines. These are things which, in art, they know that if you have to become better, you have to deliberately practice. So what can we as programmers do for deliberate practice? So, every day choose some software which you're familiar with and try to write down the context. When I say what is the context, let's go back to the video, right? He says, I want to create Jackson, who's a space punk, he's a young adult, etc., etc. Write down what that software is trying to do. So let me ask you a question. What is the intent of PowerPoint? What's the context of PowerPoint?
Help you to say a story better.
Help you to say a story better. Very nice. Civilized way of presenting. So I obviously had more time to think and jump this question into you guys. I have written down present information in an attractive manner to an audience. That's why PowerPoint was created. Now, let's consider an alternate. No. Where's the browser?
I think the deliberate practice is a lot of association with analytical thinking, so that's what you do. You learn to know to understand rules, apply rules, right? So there's a huge connection between this deliberate practice and another one. Just a perspective.
So, I'll just show you this. This is an alternative to PowerPoint. Okay, it's called Prezi. So this is how Prezi works. And so, can we think for minutes of so does he looks nice? Can you think of why PowerPoint is so different? And that's what I mean as deliberate. You need to think of, look at software, look at, I mean, this is at a very high level, you can go deeper down. You can even look at the software that you wrote or design decision you took 3 years back. That's a very good place to start. And say, why did I choose this? Now, 2 years later, would I have made a different decision, right? So we look at that. Look at decisions taken in the software. Come up with 3 whys and 3 why not. Why not Prezi? Can you think of one bad thing about Prezi?
It's not free.
No, not commercial, software.
Movement
Too
is a bit
complex.
distracting.
Technology. Huh? Sorry?
The movement was a bit distracting.
Right.
Maybe it's complex to design, not simple.
Right. Excellent. So, I'm not saying, I'm not here to say those are good answers or bad answers. I'm just saying we should get into the habit of saying why not. When we look at here, understand, when we look at the intent, we have to get into the habit of saying, oh yeah, this is very nice, but what's not nice about it? Otherwise, we will never be able to take what's not nice about PowerPoint. Right? So, this habit of looking at software, understanding the intent, we'll come back to deliberate practice being linked to analytical things. Look at decisions. Think about a design. And supposing you were using a different set of rules, how would you design it? What if I was using a software which didn't have objects? What if I was doing everything with a different framework? How would I design it? Really try it out also. I mean, if you can actually try it out something like it, then you say, oh, actually, for these things that is better, for these things this is better. Until you are actually gaining practical knowledge on multiple things, you will not be able to take the right decision. Never be able to design. Deliberate practice, I mean, it's actually there's this whole 10,000 hours of practice kind of thing, right? It is very much oriented towards skill. Like, you practice the violin for 10,000 hours, you will move up the spectrum, right? With knowledge, you just have to gain knowledge. You don't have to practice. If you know, either you know or you don't. It's binary knowledge. Skill is a spectrum. What moves you up the spectrum is practice. If you, and I think nearly a year back, I held a session here on design. Okay, some of the things which I talked about there, it's there in the history of YouTube videos will be there. Those are also things which you can use as deliberate practice, right? But at least these things, look at software. And when I say software, either software which you're using, software which you're writing, software which you wrote some time back, keep looking at that and saying, why was this done? What were the decisions taken? Why were some of the decisions good? Why were some of the good decisions bad? And 5 minutes over time. So, design is where science and art break even. So, that's my presentation. And I knew design thinking would come, so I have things to discuss. If we can take some time on just for discussion. How does this fit with your personal experience? Or, I mean, because this is things which I've been sitting at home and thinking about. So I welcome either, no, this is not at all like what I personally have faced. So how many of you feel this fits in with your personal experience? I see a raise of hands and some comments. Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes what happens is there's a certain expectation of a time frame.
Right.
So within that time frame, and then we need to make sure that everybody in the team is in sync with this approach.
Right.
Yes, we need to set it as a cultural, part of the that's another.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we need to do our own homework and then come up with a.
Right. And I think, in some ways, one of the comments which I heard, which I found very interesting, is that the whole technology of frameworks and things like that are driving us towards a place. Just avoid this question, right? People don't have to do design, they just need to use the framework, know the framework, and when I'm interviewing, boss, do you know how to use React? Yes. Show you something you don't. Do you know this? Do you know this? Yes, I know this. I know this. Yes, you know this. Okay, good. Come on board, and they start doing React. They may be lousy at design. Nobody asks them, have you ever taken a decision? Why are you taking a decision? Yeah.
One more point is organizations spend less time on the design and they quickly want to get into the implementation phase.
Right.
The emphasis or the time frame for the architecture and the design is very less. They consider that even if something has to be retrofitted, we can do it during the implementation. Once the implementation starts, nobody bothers. It might be designed something and the end product will be completely different. Once things break, then they will come back to what was put forth.
Right. I agree.
I think here peer review is very important. Rather than one guy.
Yeah, I think.
Peer review is very important.
Right. I think that is something which I missed, and I think I agree that's a very important thing because. The other person may be able to say why not, right? You may be only thinking why when there are 2 or 3 people, different perspectives come. So having design on the board and having people discuss it is also a critical step in design.
The other question is, when you interview or when you hire a person, right? So we are actually looking, can you do something in the next 5 minutes or 30 minutes?
Right.
So what we are just looking at is, whenever the instance come, they are only looking into the whole perspective. Okay, I need to React. No one worries about the context or anything.
Right.
And even when you explain a context, no one is actually trying to understand the context. They understand questions, they understand simple things. But if you give a larger context, no one wants to spend time making a quick decision. Seems to be the hiring manager's way of thinking.
Yeah.
The analytics thinking is why I'm getting hired.
Right.
So design thinking may be good, but analytic thinking because the organization has to save time. The analytic thinking is the way how I am hired, right? So people face this conflict. I see developers facing this conflict.
Right.
I actually explained that with I'll take a different example. Front end and the back end. I say people, you learn both things, you will be powerful. If you learn just one of them, your organization will be powerful because they can hire 2 people.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we are in a world like this.
Yeah. I don't want to in any way imply that analytical thinking useless. Yeah, analytical thinking is useful. It's a critical skill, but having no ability at critical thinking is really dangerous. The larger the systems, the harder the problem. Smaller the system, the less the problem. When you are trying to build large systems, if you have everybody running with analytical thinking, it's really bad. And you disagree with anything that I've said. I'm actually looking, because this is content which I sat and put down over the last week, so I may have missed something.
What about this test-driven approach where we think of tests first
Right,
and then design based on the tests that are
right, yeah.
behavior-driven tests?
Right. So, test-driven development for a lot of people, there's a lot of debate saying that if you use test-driven development, you actually get better designs, right? What I tried that, we try, we always try something before I say good or bad to it. What I found is that it is very much a question of what sequence you write the tests. Okay? If you are naturally a person who thinks in a design kind of framework, you will write the tests in the right order and it will drive your design in the right order. But if you have no clue of software design, when I asked a team member to do it, he wrote some random, in my mind, random order of tests, which actually mucked up his code, right? Test-driven is good if you have a sense of what is good design, what's the right way to do it. Then you tend to write first this test, then this test, then this test. You sequence the tests in a better way, which drives into a good design. But if you have somebody who doesn't know design and try to use test-driven development to create good design, why ask me, write this test first now? That becomes the question. That's my personal experience, yeah.
I think that EDD will be used to enhance the software,
Right.
not when you build the software from the scratch.
Right.
I think that.
Test-driven.
Yes.
Yeah.
Point of a suggestion is developers generally don't talk to test engineers. One good thing is you want the context, the test engineer always is the context.
Right.
So I always teach my teams that go and talk to a test engineer, show your code in between to the test engineer because he understands the context more. Maybe you are focusing on this, he understands the context. But always I find them fighting. But you can try, if you are a developer, you can try differently that way. Go to a test engineer, ask them even before you finish your code, ask them, what will you test and how will you beat me out?
Right.
Maybe he will give you all reasons, which is actually the context.
Right. Actually,
I don't know about test-driven development, but I know the test engineer can do.
yeah, that is also my personal experience because I do a lot of training, but I do it mainly towards focus on developers. So I met a team which outsources testing, and they're saying, "What can you do to improve my testers approach?" And it's very hard. Testers are very context driven, and because they're tests without context, they can't do it.
I think that's why the gap for the difference between the testers and developers are very. So, for example, Microsoft, that's when they were joined, the first thing we did is we dissolved I'm a developer or I'm a tester tag. So now everyone tests in Microsoft.
Yeah, that's a good thing. They call it some.
So they just have the different tags, they have to get all the rest.
That is true. A tester very often has better context. Yeah, you understand.
So I don't exactly disagree, but I have a concern regarding the point that consider what is better history. So my concern is can it influence your job innovation if you always look at what happened in the past, what was the design choice in the past? So can it hinder innovation? What is your opinion?
Yeah, that's true. Why I'm saying, so let's understand why I'm saying understanding history is important. Understanding history is important so that you know why something was done. So, and you know what was the problem being solved. So if there's a new problem, you have to innovate. You cannot rely on something which was developed. If you know the history of what was being developed, so why was Angular developed? Why was it designed in that particular way? That was because it started in a particular point in time. React was developed later. Vue is developed much later. So why is it that the Angular design is so different from the React design? Why is it so different from the Vue design? Right? Why are these three libraries having such different designs? And for that you have to go back. When was Angular? What was Angular 1 like? Or what they're doing 2? What they're doing 6? Why did they do it? You have to think about that. Not because to prevent it, get lost in that, but to understand why they took those decisions, so that when you take a decision, you have a better understanding of the why. Should I
This kind of work, if you are doing this innovation, you still maybe not need about a developer, but you need to figure out who are failed. You have to figure out that, because that gives you a lot of learning. Who succeeded and failed, that gives you learning. So history, at some point of time, when you do a real innovation or a real work, really helps.
Right.
That is my experience.
Should I have covered something in more or less depth? I just went through very fast. Yeah.
Isn't that with this agile thing where you are more into delivering things faster and faster and not giving a lot of emphasis on the design part? Do you think that is somewhat something which is not going the right way?
Yeah. So I was discussing with some people working in Yahoo and other places, and what they were saying is, as a practice, Yahoo used to have that every third sprint was a refactoring sprint. Okay, or no, every fourth sprint. They do 3 sprints on delivery. The 4th sprint would be a refactor, where they look at what was delivered over the last 3 sprints and decide what refactoring is required to bring it to good design standards. So, Agile is good. I mean, I do not, I'm not an anti-agile person, but I agree with you when you say that if you are blindly doing agile and just doing sprints and just doing delivery, you are not stopping and looking at the code that was written and seeing, oh, some refactoring is required here, you're going to get into bad shape. That I agree with. But if you are doing agile, I do think that when I was talking to this person, I thought that was a very nice strategy, that every 3 sprints for delivery, and the 4th sprint is a refactor sprint which looks at what has been delivered, how has it just got plugged into the software, and should they do some refactoring. And in that sprint, everybody focuses on refactoring. I quite like that idea. So compared to design thinking, design thinking is more focused on coming up with ideas. Okay? So, there is some overlap. I'm not saying critical thinking and design thinking, there is some overlap. But design thinking is focused a lot about coming up with new ideas, right? It is less focused on understanding the context and saying what is the appropriate solution. That's my take on it. Okay, I have 20 minutes overrun. Thank you guys. Anything you can always talk to me later. I'm here. And thank you everybody.